Today's episode is brought to you by the book Claretta Street by Colette Barris. I am pleased to share this book with you because this is the March Mocha Girls Read Book of the Month. Claretta Street, the first novel by Colette Barris, is the story of Pacomia, a bustling little town in the 60s located in the San Fernando Valley of Southern California. Claretta Street follows the lives of four young African-American girls known as the Babies, growing up in the vortex of the turbulent change of the 60s, then becoming young adults in the decadent and destructive 80s. Claretta Street takes the readers on a ride of unbelievable clarity and cause, as well as hope and change. Claretta Street is available on Amazon. Learn more by visiting mochagirlsread.com. Hey everyone, I'm your host, Tamara Ford, and welcome to Book Chat here on the Shelf Addiction Podcast. If you're new here, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. Here on Book Chat, we get bookish with book roundtable discussions, book recommendation lists, author interviews, and more. If you'd like to check out some book reviews and other bookish posts, please visit the blog at shelfaddiction.com. This is episode 181. Tonight on Book Chat, I'm interviewing author Deanna Cabinian, and she is the author of One Night and One Love. When she isn't working or writing, she enjoys traveling and spending time with her husband and their Havanese dog, Cuba. Deanna is here to talk with me about how books and music make an amazing pairing. She'll also be sharing about her two music-inspired titles. All of Deanna's social media links are below in the show notes, so if you'd like to connect with her, you know where to find her. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like and share it. Show your support by rating the podcast and leaving a positive review on Apple Podcasts or your listening app of choice. If you'd like to comment on something you've heard during today's episode, you can find me on Twitter at Shelf Addiction. If you'd like to email in feedback or questions, feel free to reach out to me at info@shelfaddiction.com or call in and leave an internet voice message via SpeakPipe. The link is below in the show notes. Hey Deanna, thank you for joining me today. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful. I am especially excited to talk to you today because I love music and I love books, and I've noticed a trend of book playlists, and I thought you would be the perfect person to talk about this because your book kind of features a musician, right? A singer, right?
It does. There's a big Elvis element to it, so.
Yeah. So let's jump into it. First, let's talk a little bit about the music. You sent over two playlists, and I listened to them both, and I thought they were pretty interesting as far as the mix of music that you had going on. How did you choose the songs to, to pair with your series?
You know, a lot of it is me selfishly liking the songs. And then also when I'm writing, I always kind of have a soundtrack in my head about like, what is this character feeling and what are they going through? And is there some song that I know that directly reflects that or, you know, is tangentially related to that? So that's like where I get the ideas for what to put on the playlist. Mm-hmm. And then sometimes it's directly referenced in the story, like with my book One Night. There are several Elvis songs that are mentioned, which some of them are on the playlist. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did notice there were a good amount of Elvis songs, but of course that feeds into the theme of the book. So what made you kind of want to write about Elvis in a way?
So it's interesting because I was not always an Elvis fan. It wasn't something I was really into. You know, I've heard of Elvis because everybody has. It wasn't until I went on my sister and I took a road trip to Graceland, which is the mansion where he lived, and he's buried there. And we really learned a lot about him, and we saw some Elvis impersonators while we were there and listened to a lot of his music. And that's really where I got the initial idea for the book. And that was almost 10 years ago now. So it's a little while.
So were you listening to Elvis music while you were writing?
I was. I didn't start writing till several years later, but I had like Elvis playlists on my iPod and computer and stuff. So I definitely it was a big source of inspiration, like after that trip.
Awesome. Because I know, like, on your playlist, you guys, all of the playlists are going to be, the two are going to be in the show notes. So you can click them and just go head on over to Spotify and take a listen. But you'll notice there's a nice mashup. You have some R&B, you have some pop music, you have, some country music. Can you tell me kind of how those different types of, I guess, genres of music kind of feed into the book?
Sure. So Elvis, obviously, we talked about how that fits in. There's a Coldplay song. I have the list up, so I'm looking at it. And the way that feeds into the book is Thompson, the main character, directly references them as like one of the saddest bands in the world. When he's going through a breakup, that's what he listens to before he gets into Elvis. And so, I mean, Coldplay has some happy songs, but definitely for me, the ones that stand out are like their melancholy, like earlier stuff where it's like, it's just extremely sad and it just fits with the whole heartbreak concept. Same with, like, there's a country song on here by Rascal Flatts and Natasha Bedingfield. Country music to me is always like a big, like, heartbreak playlist type of genre. There's Jay-Z on here. One of the reasons for that is Thompson's best friend in the book is a big Jay-Z fan. So they reference him a little bit. So yeah, I kind of pull from everywhere. And some of these songs, weren't necessarily popular when I was writing the book. So they were added later, but I love pop music, so I try to represent that the most.
That's awesome, because that is what's popular right now. And, you had some good music on there. I was just, bopping my head along. I'm like, oh yeah, I like some of these songs.
That's good.
That's good. Yeah. So do you think that, based on the songs you chose for the playlist, do you think that listening to them would put a reader in the mood of your book? Would they feel like, oh, I'm in Honolulu or I'm in Chicago or I'm, could you could they be guided through the book with the playlist and feel like this fits?
Yes, I think definitely from an emotional and plot standpoint, it fits. Not necessarily the setting. There isn't like a ton of Hawaiian music on here, but it's more like the main character's mindset and, the stages of a breakup kind of theme that these songs guide you through. So,
yeah, I've made playlists in the past based off of books, as a reader. So I'd finished, I did one for A Madness So Discreet by Mindy McGinnis. And I just thought of these songs that would just fit this melancholy, sad, kind of scary thing. And so I think a lot of people do this. And I think it's awesome when the authors do this because it really gets us in your mind and the character's mind and things like that. So are you going to be making playlists for all of your books going forward?
I'm going to now. It's a lot of fun. It breaks up the writing process. I've made themed playlists just like for years from just like my own life, like fun songs, sad songs, heartbreak songs, whatever it is. But it was really fun matching it up to stuff that I've written. So I'm definitely going to continue.
That's amazing. I really think you did a great job with it. Like, I haven't read the books, but I have read the synopsises. I've read, the reviews. And I mean, just based on what I've read, these songs really line up. And I think that's exciting. So I definitely recommend everyone to check out the playlist and to check out the books. The links are in the show notes. So let's talk a little bit about Thompson Lake. Is this just a duology or do you have more planned for Thompson Lake?
I do have more planned. And what's funny is that I did not intend for this to be a series, but it sort of became one because readers would ask me, well, what happens to him next? What's coming next? And I always intended One Night to just live by itself, but then I had a couple ideas, which turned into One Love. And then it's kind of open-ended. It's not like a huge cliffhanger, but it kind of leaves the door open for something else. And I am currently working on another installment that's set during Christmas. So it's really fun, and I think it'll be really interesting.
Nice. So is this told from Thompson's point of view, the whole story?
Yes, the whole
Okay.
series.
So tell us a little bit about his ex, Caroline. I'm very curious about her based on, what I've read. So can you tell a little bit why Thompson wants her back so bad?
Sure. So she's his first love, first girl he's ever been with. And he's super heartbroken and he wants her back. And she is a mega Elvis fan. So he goes to this Elvis impersonator night at this restaurant to try and run into her because he knows that she goes to these concerts. And so the series is about it starts off with someone doing something crazy to run into an ex or get their ex back. And I know just from talking to people in my life that everyone kind of has a story kind of like this, something embarrassing where they tried to run into someone again or try and get them back. So that's how it starts off. And starts with him trying to get her back. And then, eventually he realizes maybe there's a reason that they broke up in the first place.
Oh, smart guy. So I assume he has some heartache and some, I guess, growing up to do as he learns that lesson.
Yes, definitely.
Apparently, we kind of leave Hawaii at some point. What made you take us across the country to Chicago in this story?
Well, I don't want to spoil the plot, but yeah. So one of the things that happens in the book is he's at this Elvis night and he makes friends with one of the guys performing and starts working as an intern for him. And he comes to find that he's kind of experiencing a similar, heartbreak to himself and pining after this girl. And eventually it leads him to Chicago. I don't want to give away too much, but there's definitely a trip to Chicago to try and, win her back. So,
yeah. Cool. So, okay, tell me, who's your favorite character in this story and why?
I like all of them, but I would have to say Thompson's my favorite just because I identify with him the most. He's a hopeless romantic and he gets his heart broken, and there aren't a ton of stories about guys getting their heart broken. And I think people forget that they're just as vulnerable as girls are when it comes to that. So his outlook on life is really interesting. The crazy things he gets into. So he's my favorite because he's the star of the series, I guess.
Yeah, I do agree with you. That is not very usual to see, the male as the point of view of a contemporary romance is very different and unique. I like that. So what inspired you to use, him as the main character versus, I don't know. I mean, I understand that he's the guy that's driving everything, but what made you choose a guy instead of a girl leading the "let me get you back" type of thing?
Part of the reason is, his character popped into my head one day. That's part of the reason. I had this idea for an Elvis impersonator as a character who's Johnny in the book. But I was missing the narrative arc. What is the story actually going to be about? Him performing, that wasn't any story. And I was, walking to the train one day. I take the train to work, and I was walking to the train from work, and I just got this idea for this kid who was heartbroken. It ends up at an Elvis night, and I wish all ideas came to me this way, but that's not always the case.
Yeah.
So that's where it started, and then also I thought it would be a challenge to twist it around and have the guy's point of view instead of the typical girl that we see a lot. And also, I think, just me personally, it's easier to write male characters because I'm not male. And what I mean by that is some of my earlier stuff that I wrote with female lead characters, they would always end up being like me or some variation of me and not that interesting or not have, a ton of problems, and everything would work out for them. And I think just like having distance from a different gender like allowed me to write a male point of view more effectively than just sticking with female.
Mm-hmm. Did you get like a lot of feedback from the male, from men on the male point of view of things when you were writing?
I did. And, some examples I give are early stages of editing, just the way Thompson would describe things. I remember there was one part that used to read like, she was wearing a spaghetti strap dress, and a guy was like, yeah, heterosexual male doesn't know what a spaghetti strap is, so just say a dress. And it's just like little things like that you don't think about. But then once somebody points it out, it's like, okay, I get it.
Yeah. I think that's probably like from a reader standpoint, you kind of catch those things when like the opposite sex is writing for the main character. But when it's well done, it's like, wow, you can barely tell, when it's done really well. So I applaud you for having some feedback on that. That's great. So as you wrote along and you're listening to your music and you're getting in Thompson's head, did the music kind of guide the plot? Or you kind of just had the plot and you're like, okay, we'll just make these Elvis songs go along with the plot. Because obviously it started with Elvis. Did Elvis guide you through it, or did he kind of just come along for the ride?
I would say a combination of both. Because when I was writing this, I came across a more what I'll call obscure Elvis CDs, one of his later CDs, which has the song Hurt on it, which is it's referenced in the first couple of pages of the book. And so I was listening to that CD while I was like in the beginning stages of this, and some of the other songs inspired different scenes. And so it was a combination of, coming along for the ride and also, directly influencing what happened in the story.
I really liked what you had to say about Elvis. I'm not an Elvis fan, but you know what? I'm tempted to listen to some Elvis just because of the playlist that you put together, like for real.
Oh, great.
Also, I find it interesting that you chose Elvis I guess Elvis chose you because this is a young adult novel as well, and not a lot of young adults listen to Elvis that I know of. So do you think that this is going to, I guess, pull in the readership to kind of like, oh, let me check this out because it's something different?
That's my hope, because like I said, I didn't like Elvis earlier. It wasn't until like several years ago that I started listening to him. And, the hope is that it does open people's eyes to like how talented he was. And, Elvis in general is viewed as a little bit cheesy, but definitely his songs, have emotional resonance. So hopefully people will check it out.
Yeah. And this is young adult. So is this like older? Obviously he's 17. So like, what do you think the level of maturity is on this type of read?
I would say 13 and up. So even though the protagonist is, 17, almost 18, I think younger and older teens would enjoy it.
Okay, so it must have a pretty low heat level, huh? As far as the romance?
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about that, probably a PG-13 max. So.
Okay. Well, I always have to ask because honestly, nowadays with some young adult pushes the limits really far. So I know people always like to know what they're getting into before they crack open the book.
Right. It's definitely on the cleaner side, I would say, just because, I don't know, when I'm writing, like, I feel like I have my grandmother over my shoulder, like, would I be embarrassed for her to read this? Not like censoring myself, but like, just think about, does this really need to be in here or not? So
yeah. Wow. Well, that's kind of cool because, I feel like when you have a cleaner book, you are open to more audiences than when you don't. So because, people who read both types of books will read a clean book, and people who only read clean books will only read the clean book. So, you have more possible readers looking at your book, which is a good thing.
Right.
So is there anything else you'd like to share with us about your series?
Sure. I think you touched on that it's set in Hawaii, which I set it in Hawaii because I love Hawaii. I went there for the first time several years ago, and I worked on a Habitat for Humanity project there and fell in love with that area. And I've been back a couple times, and there aren't a ton of books set in Hawaii, so I think that makes it unique. Mm-hmm. I would also say that it appeals to males and females, maybe more heavily females, but just because it does tell the male point of view, like we mentioned. And it's really, even though it does deal with heartache, it does have a pretty upbeat ending, which I like. So I prefer to read books with a happy, hopeful ending. So people like that, they should check it out.
Okay, great. So it's because this is a series, so it kind of has closure, but kind of open to more at the end of the second book.
Right. There's closure, but it leaves it open in case I was going to do a third book, which I am now planning to do.
Well, that's good to know. So you guys check out the Thompson Lake series, and all the links are below in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining me today, Deanna.
No problem.
It was lovely talking to you, and I definitely will share your playlist with everyone.
Great. Thank you so much.
If you enjoyed today's book chat episode and would like to show your support, there are a few things you can do. Head on over to Apple Podcasts and leave a positive 5-star review. You can follow me on Twitter at Shelf Addiction. Most importantly, you can share this podcast with friends and family that enjoy all things bookish, including author interviews. Thank you for listening, and until next time, happy reading.